There's no doubt who is responsible for this heinous use of chemical weapons in Syria. The Syrian regime.
Options that we are considering are not about regime change. They are about responding to a clear violation of an international standard that prohibits the use of chemical weapons.
The question is, will those attacks just be a retaliation and Bashar basically goes on as normal, or will those attacks degrade his capabilities, particularly his air capabilities?
Charles.
But it's precisely because of all those unknowns that if you're going to cross the line, you're going to cross the Rubicon and enter into the war by killing people, by launching cruise missiles, as the administration clearly is about to do, that it do something, not just as an expression of outrage, you know, as a kind of a show of Obama's conscience. If you're going to actually cross the line with all the possible consequences you've outlined, which could be serious, then have a strategic effect. We don't hear that. We heard Carney say this isn't about the regime change. Well, then it's a pointless exercise. If it's going to be an attack, what it should be aimed at, as General Lakeen was explaining, having the objective of weakening the regime, of stopping Assad, who is now winning this war, and giving the rebels a chance of winning or weakening Assad. Imagine the effect on the rebels who've been abandoned. Nobody's helped them up until now. And the word now from Washington, loud and clear, is the Americans are going to act. This is a country that took down the Taliban in 100 days, took down Saddam in Iraq, who'd been in power for 30 years, took him down in 3 weeks. We have the capacity to take away the air assets of this regime. If we are going to have an attack, it should be aimed at that. And if it's not, we shouldn't be doing anything.
Bashar al-Assad felt he had to use these chemical weapons, but he had used them before. And the president had said it was a red line, and he interpreted it as a green light. Now we'll see what kind of action we take. And if it's simply that we launch some cruise missiles and do that for 3 days and not have a significant effect on the momentum on the battlefield, it'll have an unhelpful effect.
Seems like, from all the signals we're getting, they have in mind a punitive strike, something that just sends the message that we strongly disapprove of what you've done. And there are precedents for that. We've seen that during the Clinton administration in Iraq, and the cruise missile strikes on Sudan, and retaliation for alleged involvement in terrorism. So I think
all of them had no effect and had the opposite message of America being unserious in every case. When we did the cruise missiles attack in '98 under the Clinton administration after the bombing of our embassies, Osama bin Laden concluded America was unserious, was the weak horse. 3 years later, we had 9/11. Look, I think it's a question of, are you serious or not? Assad will understand. If it's a punitive strike and he emerges from the smoke essentially unhurt strategically, he wins this round, and it will have been all for nothing and risking all of the things that Nina had talked about needlessly.
I don't know a single person in our military, not one, who thinks attacking Syria is remotely a good idea or will have any positive benefit for our national security. This is about President Obama shooting off his mouth about red lines, painting himself into a corner. Now he wants to restore his credibility. Well, how much danger to the United States is it worth to try to restore the president's credibility?
Here is Senator Ted Cruz on Hannity last night. Well, no, he's not there. But I'll tell you what he said. U.S. national security interest is the touchstone that the president should be explaining, and the United States Armed Forces doesn't exist to be policemen for the world. Charles, you may hear more of that in coming days.
No, I think there has to be a debate on whether this is in the strategic interest of the United States. It shouldn't be a moral spasm as a reaction to a chemical weapons attack. That's not why you go to war. You go to war if it will be important for our security ultimately, and either it is or it isn't. The reason that the support for the war is low is because Americans hate war, rightly so, and don't like wars, especially way on the other end of the world, which is where all our wars are. Unless there's a president who will make a case FDR in the Second World War, George Bush Sr. in the Gulf War, to make a case for why Americans are going to say no, obviously. And Obama has not said a word about Syria. This didn't spring up on us yesterday. The war started 3 years ago. Obama said 2 years ago, he said, Assad has to go. He did nothing. He never made the case. He never argued. He never gave a speech. And now it was 6 months ago that we had the first chemical attack. It was a year ago he drew the red line. So he makes all these statements. He does nothing. I'm not talking about on the ground, but rhetorically. So why would Americans support him? Which is why he should have a debate in Congress.
I should point out, I got to go quickly, but British Parliament is debating this, whether to intervene tomorrow morning.
Exactly, and it's a shame that the Prime Minister of England convenes the Parliament so he can get support, and the American President ignores his Congress and acts unilaterally.
This has been a Sunfish production.